Coming up on this week's Media Project, join Alan Chartock, Rosemary Armao, Barbara Lombardo, and me, Judy Patrick, filling in for Rex Smith. We'll talk about the January 6th congressional hearings and Fox's decision not to offer wall-to-wall coverage. We'll talk about what happens when journalists invade a small community like Uvalde to cover a mass shooting. And we'll talk about Joe Biden and his complaints that he's not getting a fair enough shake from the media. All that and much more coming up on the Media Project next.
Newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record about some charming people I have known. For I meet politicians and grafters by the score, killers plain and fancy, it's really quite a bore. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. They wallow in corruption, crime, and gore. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, city desk, pull the press, extra, extra, read all about it, it's a mess, meets the test. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. It's wonderful to represent the press. Now,
welcome to the Media Project, an inside look at media coverage of current events. I'm Judy Patrick, former editor of the Daily Gazette, and now I'm vice president for editorial development for the New York Press Association, and I'm filling in for our usual host, Rex Smith, former editor of the Albany Times-Union. Joining us this week is WAMC's CEO, commentator, columnist, publisher, etc. Fundraiser, Alan Chartock. Yeah. How you doing, Alan?
Not too well. I haven't been sleeping well. People have been waking me up in the middle of the night to complain about things.
So everything's as normal.
Then Roselle just rolls over and everything's okay.
You're making a number of assumptions, but let's go on.
Also with us is former editor, investigative journalist, and UAlbany professor Rosemary Armao, and Barbara Lombardo, journalism professor at the University at Albany and former executive editor of the Saratogian and the Troy Record. Thanks for being with us for the program for which we apparently are never supposed to prepare, according to Dr.
Well, no, I come in here and I see that you all have oodles of paper laid out in front of you and you're studying assiduously. And I'm saying, what part of this did I miss? Producer Speedy Gustina never sent me anything, so I don't know whether there are subjects we're going to be talking about that I don't know about, but that's just the way it is.
We think we've learned that you're best when you're extemporaneous.
Well, that means you're a dead temporaneous.
So let's begin with the January 6th hearings that are happening at the congressional level. We're finding that there's blanket coverage of this by all the major networks, but there's a hole in the blanket, and that's Fox News. Instead of covering the hearings, Fox has decided to stick to its primetime lineup of opinionated conservative hosts. You'll still be able to hear Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham. They have repeatedly downplayed the assault on the Capitol on January 6th and describe it as a ruse to overturn the rightful presidency of Donald Trump. So my question to you all is this brilliant counter-programming on Fox News' part, or is this abrogation of their duty? What do you think, Alan?
I know. The answer is there are some news organizations that don't recognize something as news if they don't like it. And I think Fox falls well into that category. They don't like it, so they don't report it, and that's it. They are, to put it mildly, a disgrace. We are joined, of course, by the incredible Rosemary Armao, who I know will have something to say about this.
Well, I actually disagree.
What?
I think it's brilliant. I think they're playing to their audience, which doesn't want to watch the whole thing. And I'm not sure even on the liberal side we want to watch the whole thing. There's a lot of procedural crap that goes on in these meetings. There's a lot of boring stuff, speechifying. And they're going to go in and just, they say, we'll see if they actually do it, but they're going to just give us the relevant parts. I mean, we do this all the time with, say, trials. How often do we do gavel-to-gavel coverage? Now, in my point of view, I think this is worth gavel-to-gavel coverage, and I would do it. But I can't totally disagree with an opinion to go the other way.
Well, but on the other hand, people suspect the news. They suspect the people who give us the news organize it according to their own likes and dislikes. I have often said to my classes, okay, give me an article from the New York Post, the Daily News, the New York Times, on the same subject, by the way. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you which newspaper it comes from.
Has a voice, it has a bias. And, Fox certainly has not made any secret as a unit, not any individuals, but as a unit, they've made it clear that they think this is all bogus. However, I look at their strategy and they have more viewers than any of the other stations, any of the other networks. So why don't we start using those tactics?
Could you just for a moment go into some of those tactics?
Commentary that is at odds with the news, strong voices, advocacy, selective news coverage.
The right accuses the left of selective news coverage, whether or not that's true. And I think it is charmingly naive of you to say that they're going
so nice, charmingly naive.
That Fox is going to report the essence of what happened, that they're going to pick and choose the right things.
I deliberately said we'll see if they do it. So,
did you say that? I missed that part.
Yeah, I did say that. I said we'll see if they actually.
I'm going to re-roll when I listen to this Sunday at 6. I'll let you know.
I said if they actually carry through with it. And it isn't charming naivete; it's experience. We've had this argument on many topics.
But
we
they're
keep getting
part
to
of
the
the
same
story
point.
too. I mean, they
are.
If Mark Meadows texts with Hannity and how do you say her name, Laura Ingraham, they don't want their listeners to know about those things. They don't want to call attention to those things. So I think from a strategic point of view, I agree with you, Rosemary, that it's in their interest to cater to their audience and to protect themselves by not going gavel to gavel. But it's a disservice.
But is it the public interest? Fox Business Channel will carry the hearings live, but the Fox main network has a very large audience.
Yeah, that channel has 1/10 of the audience of Fox News.
Right. And again, the Lifetime channel probably won't be covering this. Either will ESPN. But Fox News positions itself as a news network, and that's one of the reasons why people are saying perhaps they should be covering it. They say they will break in for regular coverage. There are 6 or 7 of these hearings scheduled for the month of June. We don't know what else is happening. The rest of the summer it's supposed to wrap up by September. Do any of you remember watching the Watergate hearings?
Yes, every second of it. But we're not the norm. I mean, all of us here read multiple news outlets. You can't even say newspapers anymore, although it was in Watergate. But that's not the norm. There are people out there who are really busy and actually are far more interested in inflation. I was going to say the war in Ukraine, but I think it's only inflation and rising prices. They're more interested in that than in anything else. I don't think they would sit. How many people are going to sit and watch the whole thing?
What worries me more than them not showing it gavel to gavel is their denigrating of it. Their message that this is not important, that this is not real, that this is just a lefty Democrat political play. And that's really troubling because it reinforces what they want their listeners to believe.
That we agree on.
That's frightening. And you can hear it on the local AM stations. I was popping around on my way here this morning. It's already being denigrated before it even happens.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm looking for from the committee is the release of documents so that they have been fairly secretive throughout their investigation. And perhaps that's because it's an investigation and it needs some level of secrecy. But I am hearing calls from journalists that the committee should be releasing all of its documents, all of the recorded testimony, and they haven't done that yet.
It's interesting that you use the word leaking as opposed to releasing. You said they should be leaking as opposed to releasing.
I meant releasing.
No.
I meant releasing, so everyone can add it for posterity, if nothing else.
I feel like that's more a roundtable discussion than media because we're talking about government, but I think the committee has been ridiculous in the way they've handled it. I'm not a big fan of secrecy. What did that do for Mueller? All those months who said, isn't he brilliant? He's got it all tapped down. No, should have been leaking things. And now the committee's doing the same thing. And they also, enough has come out so that none of this hearing, or very little of it, I fear, will feel new. Will feel new and different, which leads to the Fox supporters saying, oh, see, it is just a hack. They're just going over the same stuff over and over again. And partly that's the way it's been played out.
Well, isn't there a problem we should look at here as a distinguished panel, or maybe mostly distinguished panel, and ask this question: isn't it wild that so many Americans are so dumb? I mean, the fact is that because I think you've said things like this, Rosemary.
I know.
And therefore, you can put almost anything over that you want because, you got a very gullible public.
I've been reading this week, getting ready for the January 6th hearing, about the Iran-Contra affair. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Most people don't. And Reagan was as culpable on the face of it as Trump is.
And got away clean.
Scot-free. Everyone who was caught up in the scandal was pardoned by George Bush, Papa Bush. CIA director at the time, wasn't involved at all, of course. And the public just forgot about it, forgave it all, and went on. Everybody in that affair went on to illustrious careers. And I fear the same thing's going to happen here. I think Trump could be the next president.
Andy Borowitz, the satirist for The New Yorker, suggested that Fox News has opted to air reruns of the 2015 Benghazi hearings instead of the...
Wow.
That's good. That's a good one.
That's funny.
Let's move on to Uvalde and the aftermath of the coverage there. We're hearing complaints from reporters that they're not getting the information that they need to inform the public about what happened. But we're also hearing some blowback from people in a community. When a big event like this happens, especially in a small town, you get an invasion of local journalists, and you get a certain amount of antagonism towards the reporters who remain there and are in people's faces about how do they feel, what's happening next. And so is the media being responsible, or are some parts of the media being irresponsible in pushing this small community for content that they want about the shooting?
I love the fact that we have three very distinguished editors, ex-editors, sitting right here. All of you have assigned reporters to very difficult tasks, including going to the home of somebody who has just been murdered and asking a relative, how does it feel to be the mother, the father, the brother, the sister of a murdered person? I would lay most of this at your doors, the three of you, because I think you are ultimately responsible for assigning those people.
I'd assign them. I'd send an army out there. I think that's the wrong story, though, how people are feeling and the impact of young people dying. That story has been done and covered, and in fact, it's in full public view. The little girl and the father speaking in Congress. Oh, my God, it doesn't get any more heart-wrenching than that. The story is the cops stonewalling the press and the public in that community about what went on. Why did they spend 78 minutes standing in the hallway doing nothing while shots were being fired and kids were pleading for their lives? Who wrote the lies that then went to the governor and were disseminated? What's the punishment for that? The guy who is the police chief is now on city council. He's barricading himself in his office. I'd have reporters out of his door around the clock. They pushed him out of the building. Did you read that? The reporters who are waiting for a public official in a public building were told to get out. They were trespassing. So they waited in the street for it. Crazy stuff. This is a story that needs coverage.
Yes, and I don't want it to get pushed aside.
Right.
That's really a danger that could happen.
Right. We're seeing instances of police agencies being called in to keep reporters out of public venues. But also, early on when the funerals started to happen, the press was barred from a lot of the funerals. And the question is, do you send a reporter in when you're not welcome to cover?
Barred by who?
By the family. Do you respect the family's wishes if someone has been tragically killed?
Yes.
Or
Right.
I've been into those funerals. A little boy tragically killed, and I just went in. I didn't carry my notebook, and I wrote a story about the death of a young boy. I got a thank you note from the family later. Yeah, if you have a gaggle of reporters, in the back with cameras and all that, but that's not what happens.
Yes, but that could happen with something like this, where reporters from a wide geographic area and a lot of different media people are going to be trying to get in there. So having been in that situation in the past, sometimes you would stay outside of wherever the funeral service is being held. You might try to talk to people coming in, talk to people coming out, or you might do, I think what you're talking about also, quietly sit in the back. You're making observations, you're listening, but you're not being intrusive.
Yeah.
Well, have you guys ever had direct confrontation, the three of you, all veteran reporters, with somebody who just resented your being there?
Every day.
Yes.
And that,
life.
Can you tell us all a little about it? Because, we're sitting here listening to the radio, and you guys are the war correspondents, so what do you got?
I totally love it. When you know your rights and you're in a place and you have a story that needs to be covered and someone is obstructing you, you can get this self-righteous feeling and just say, I'm going to cover it.
Do you ever get self-righteous, Rosemary?
Oh, yes, I do. I love that feeling. To be thrown out of a secretly called meeting of the Public Housing Authority. A source calls you and tells you about it, and you show up, and they're horrified to see you there, and they want to close the meeting, and you're just reciting the law to them, or they try to close a public hearing. You guys have done the same thing.
It's easy to be righteous, though, when you're dealing with public officials or a public entity. It's a lot more difficult when you're dealing with a family, especially someone who's not used to the press. Kelly McBride, the journalism ethics point person at Poynter Institute, she advises news organizations to better prepare when assigning people to these stories. Most interviews on the street indicate this work sometimes isn't done. People in shock and trauma, she said, shouldn't have to make an on-the-spot decision about dealing with someone in the press.
Yes, and I think that journalists need to be trained either in school or by their editors and be prepared of how to approach a family, what to say, what not to say.
Is there anything they can say?
Well, yes, I'm so sorry for your loss. I would love to tell your story. Would you be willing to talk to me? And so that you're empathizing, not fake empathize, because these are real tragedies, and you're not trying to be an arrogant bully pushing in, but you're trying to give them an opportunity to talk about their loved one or the issues.
Rather than just as a victim that, your daughter was found in the ditch.
Like, how do you feel?
And we're going to print that. I'm sorry we're going to have to, but I want our readers to know your daughter as you knew her. Can you talk to us?
I remember having our paper do a 1 year or a 5 year follow-up on an unsolved murder, which is a rare thing up in Saratoga. And the young reporter, one of her questions was going to be like whether the parents were still, grieving for their kid.
Jeez.
So that's inexperience and youth, and you never will get over that, having lost a child. So that you need to be sensitive and cognizant of how you're approaching people and what
or
you're
the
saying.
Classic stereotype TV question where they shove a microphone in your face. How does it feel to lose your daughter to a murderer? Yeah, kind of dumb. And it's counterproductive. You don't get information that way.
Here's somebody who should be knowledgeable about how to handle that. The president, Joe Biden, he is complaining about the amount of coverage or the kind of coverage he's getting. He's pressing his aides to develop a more compelling message and to do a better job of getting the news of his administration out. Are parts of the media, aside from Fox News, failing this president and his administration?
Well, first of all, let's remember that I believe every president who ever breathed a breath of air has had that complaint. They're not giving
Abraham Lincoln, for one.
Yeah, they're not giving me what I deserve. And sometimes I think it's true. I'm one of those who believes that a lot of members of the press have a particular agenda in terms of what they want to do to a particular political officer. And some of them really are quite reprehensible, period. End of sentence.
I think they're usually caught out, though, when it's that blatant.
Yeah.
I think that Biden is right. His message is not getting across, and his team is not performing well. That complaint, however, is with his team. It's with the politicians, not with the media, which is just doing their job. The way that story is framed, it's like the media is doing something wrong. I don't even think Biden is saying that. He's saying to his people, you got to get our message across, which is something we've been saying for a long time about Democrats overall. They don't message as well as Republicans.
I would agree with that. Biden's people need to be better at doing what they want the media to do, which is to be critical of the Republican obstructionism. And if they were more forceful about saying what isn't happening because of them, we would be reporting that he was saying that. At the same time, there are subtle word choices and story choices that the media uses that I think reinforces the characteristics that Biden is justifiably complaining about. Coming down here on the radio, I heard an NPR report where they were talking about this America's Summit that Biden is at.
Yeah, I heard it.
And because they wanted to address immigration issues and how big that is on the continent, and they said that the ability to actually accomplish something is probably going to be small because of Biden's inability, it's not an exact quote, but the inability to get the Mexico president and other key leaders. So now it's his fault that they didn't get in, instead of saying the refusal of Mexico's president and other key leaders. So the way
it's framed,
it's like a subtle way of saying that it's Biden's fault, or is it not Biden's fault? And I think we need to be more aware of that.
Yes, I was going to ask you, as an impartial observer of the journalistic and political scene, whether your views on all of these things would change based on whether, these were people you were sympathetic to or not. In other words, if you're a Democrat by nature as opposed to a Republican, do you think you could sit here and be objective?
Well, you're bringing your own feelings to the table.
Yes, that's right. And you're criticizing others for bringing their
I don't see how that comes into play here.
Oh, okay.
I do think it matters. I deliberately did not and could not participate in any coverage of the Trump administration because I'm so anti-Trump. And I see the danger of that when I see the reporting on the origin of the Wuhan flu, where the media overall dismissed any idea that it came from a lab. We just dismissed that because Trump was in favor of that theory. And it proved to actually have some scientific validity. Essentially, it was disproved later, but only after an investigation. I ignored all that because I didn't want Trump to be right. Mueller,
yes.
How would I have reported on Mueller? I could not. I was angry at Mueller for not nailing it down, angry at Barr for the way he mischaracterized it, and a whole lot of that is my anti-Trump feeling. I can't report on him.
I can.
When it comes
but it's still going to come across as not
Rosemary,
flattering.
I mean, let's take it to its absolute absurd. Let's say you were a German back in the 1930s, and Hitler was coming to power, and you found Hitler to be totally reprehensible.
Yep.
Do you say, then I'm not going to cover him because of my feelings?
We actually have a very modern correspondent to that, which is Russian journalists. 150 Russian journalists. They're investigators. They're real journalists. They hate what's happening in Ukraine, hate the Russian policy, and they've actually, at great risk to their life, gone into Latvia and other countries surrounding Russia to continue reporting by phone and by, contact that way, to continue reporting on the malfeasance of the Russians. So I guess that is a sort of prejudice they have, which is anti-war and anti-tyranny, and they've continued to work. So that's a little bit different than having a bias.
Excuse me. It's fact-based reporting. Yeah. So if you're reporting information, not just opinion and not just political trivia or beliefs or baloney.
Yeah,
But that's what they always say, don't they, Barbara? The idea that everything we do is fact-based, but it's really not.
Well, good journalism is fact-based. And on that note, I just wanted to take issue with something you said earlier that is bugging me.
That I said?
Hard to believe, and yet, when you said that there were so many dumb Americans, and
Yes,
that bothered me, because that's exactly the type of language that turns people away. You don't want to be called dumb, and that we're not better than somebody who disagrees with us. So use another word after that, gullible maybe. Mm-hmm. I feel like Rosemary's going to explode.
Well,
She's going to say they are dumb.
I'm going to go to my lawyer, Rosemary Armao.
Okay,
I don't think that is persuasive.
It isn't persuasive, but there's a whole strain of anti-intellectualism in American life. And for a long time, we were told, and I even believed it, that on the whole, the American people always make the right choices. Just leave it to them, present the case, and they'll make the right choices. I do not believe that is true. And I see things like the Mueller report, like Trump. Okay, let's take Warren Zirkle. He was a corrupt and horrible Secretary of the Interior under Trump. Awful man. So much so that he's drummed out of office, never indicted, so our legal system doesn't work. And now he's running and is ahead in a lead to go back to Congress from Montana. That is not smart choices. Herschel Walker was picked by Republican voters in Georgia. I'm sorry, the man is stupid, in the classic sense, unschooled, uneducated, and inarticulate and dumb, any way you want to define the word, and he's a sexual predator. And yet he's now a candidate for the U.S. Senate. That's not gullible. That's dumb voting. I agree with Alan.
You remind me of a one-on-one conversation I had with a Tea Party advocate back when I was editor of a newspaper. We wanted to meet people who were upset with our coverage. And after a long conversation, the man finally said to me, "The problem with you, ma'am, is you have too much education." That was very enlightening to me because I hadn't laid out any credentials. I was just giving him talking points.
Well, the more important question is, what did you say back to him?
I had to laugh. I had to chuckle because he caught me. I was stunned. I did not understand what his problem with education was. But
anti-intellectualism, and that's a great threat to our democracy.
And it has been. This is nothing new. This is not Trump or Tea Party or anything of recent vintage. It goes back to Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. There was the same strain of this in America. And as I've said on the roundtable many times, I'm not taking name, or call me elite if you want. Call me overeducated. Thank you very much is what my answer will be, and you should be too.
Call me Ishmael.
Yeah, one of the problems that a columnist from CNN, Edward Isaac Dover, noted about Biden was that he is a, quote, 79-year-old man who still thinks in terms of newspaper front pages and primetime TV programs, surrounded by not quite as senior aides in senior positions with the same late 1990s media diet. Mm-hmm. The idea being that he is not getting out there. I think there was an effort. He met with the outrageously popular pop group BTS, but he did it behind closed doors. There was a photo op, but he didn't really make as much hay with that as he could have, and he got some tweets on it, but it didn't go very far.
Well, but as an 80-year-old, I sense a certain amount of ageist comment coming from you.
Well, who's BTS then? Here's the quiz.
There was an article by John Alsop from Columbia Journalism Review, and he called them the supergroup BTS. So it was the first time that I not only knew they were a supergroup, but that I learned that they existed. So, and yet millions of people viewed that video. So there's opportunity to reach people.
It isn't ageism. Trump is nearly as old as Biden, and he was magnificent in the use of Twitter, Facebook, all the social media.
I'm still confounded by that.
I know how he got it, how he tapped into the whole, discontent of the American working class, too. How did that idiot get all that? But he did, and you have to give him credit for it.
Oh, I don't know that you have to give him credit for it, but you could have stopped right there and said, but he did, and you were right.
Well, he got a lot of media coverage that helped.
Biden can't win. He had Matthew McConaughey, the actor, the famous the Oscar award-winning actor, at the White House speaking about gun control. It was really emotional. It was a good
And he's
speech.
from that town where the shooting was.
Exactly. So there was reason for it. And I'm hearing from, the Trump supporters who write to WAMC saying, oh, my God, we have an actor standing up in place of the president. He's unable even to speak on this. Biden gave 2 really good speeches about gun control after Uvalde. So he cannot win. There are talking points against him. There's a directed campaign on the right against Biden and painting him as incompetent and senile. And I don't think anything he does, short of a campaign that his people are far from putting together to show him to be different than that.
Well, I don't know, Rosemary. I have a different kind of feeling. I think that if the candidates in the next presidential election are Biden and Trump, Biden is going to win, despite the fact that his numbers are low. I think it's a question about who's your opponent.
And who comes out to vote. I wish I could say I was as optimistic as you.
Well,
look at what's happening in some state legislatures.
So we have time for one more topic before we have to say goodbye. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Washington Post reporter Dave Weigel and his suspension for a month without pay for retweeting an off-color misogynistic joke on Twitter.
Can you give us a hint as to what was in the...
it's in that material that we looked at.
All women... Why can't we say it? All women are bi, he wrote. You just have to figure out whether it's bisexual or bipolar. Definitely misogynistic.
There's no question about that.
Journalists are encouraged to be on social media, encouraged to get tweets and retweets and develop a persona, but when they don't, they get slammed pretty hard, and not every company has a social media policy. Washington Post does, and this is what it called for.
Well, this was a really dumb thing for him to even think it was okay to do, and to think that there was humor in it and to do it. I would add to that, who hasn't done something dumb and regretted? I shouldn't have thought it, but I did think it, and I shouldn't have tweeted it, or whatever it is that they did. And what's a fitting penalty? He's been suspended, right? And
without pay for a month.
Good.
I think that's fair. I don't think you should lose your job over it, but it needs to be a message to him and to other journalists to think before you speak or tweet.
The real problem at the Washington Post is that their social media policy is full of holes and conflicts, and it's irregularly enforced. And that's the problem this reporter ran into. He wasn't disciplined at first. He was disciplined after a female reporter who has been punished and publicized in a bad way for her tweets. She's a sexual assault survivor, and so she's commented on Kobe Bryant and others, and she was punished for it. And so she said, oh, nice. She has a case against the paper that it's a toxic work environment. And his tweet played right into it. He got what he deserved.
Yeah, and it was disturbing to me that he even thought that it was something funny worth sharing.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week.
No.
Yes, indeed. Thanks to Alan, Rosemary, and Barbara. And thanks to our producer, David Castina. I'm Judy Patrick. Thanks for joining us. See you next week on The Media Project.
Now publishers are such interesting people. It could be prostitution, I don't know. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, circulation, ting-a-ling-a-ling, advertising, get those readers, get that payoff. What a headache, what a mess. Oh, publishers are such interesting people. Let's give 3 cheers for freedom of the press.